final thing, continue.
Welcome everyone to our webinar on West Papua. We're waiting here for maybe tiny little bit more for people to arrive, and then we'll shortly start. So welcome everyone. We're excited to have you all listening and are delighted to have Veronica Koman, Melissa Crouch and Ronny Kareni as experts in our round. Thank you all for making this possible. I will start this webinar with an acknowledgement of country first. I acknowledge the Warami people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I am meeting you all from, and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community. I also acknowledge the many other traditional custodians of the land of where you are all joining us from, and I pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We'll first give you a quick overview over the course of our webinar. Melissa Crouch will give us a brief introduction. Veronica, Melissa and Ronny will then each talk about a topic of their expertise, followed by a question and answer session. And at the end, there will be a roundup from the diplomacy training side. So now we'll go a tiny bit of a housekeeping before we finally start. I want to remind you all again to stay on mute during the webinar and type in your questions for the Q&A session in the chat box on the side. I apologize in advance that we can't discuss all the questions due to time, but the webinar is being recorded and will be posted at the end of the event on DTP's website, as well as a document with links on how to move forward and ways to help. So I will now hand over to Melissa.
Great, thank you, and welcome to what I believe is one of the first webinars for the Diplomacy Training Program. My name is Melissa. I'm from the University of New South Wales here in Sydney, and we're delighted to have this seminar on today. I first just want to say that the Diplomacy Training Program is one that has a long-standing reputation for advancing human rights and empowering civil society in Asia Pacific region. And in the past, that has included people from West Papua. Their training program has been so successful that last year they were the recipients of the Asian Democracy and Human Rights Award, which is a fantastic endorsement of their work. And encourage you to check out their website if you're not familiar with DPT's work. I also just wanted to welcome those who might be former alumni of DPT in some way. I think it's great we can have this webinar format, and I hope that it's a way for the broader DPT alumni to stay connected. So today, as you know, the focus for our session is on West Papua, and particularly around the question of, well, has special autonomy in West Papua failed, and what should Indonesia and Australia be doing about it? Now, of course, I want to acknowledge that we're in a very unusual time globally, and of course, much of our attention is focused on the COVID-19 health crisis, and rightly so. But I think it's useful today to take some time to think about particularly vulnerable communities and people groups such as West Papua that might face particular challenges, but that also have experienced a history of challenges of discrimination, of human rights violations, and have a future that in many ways still faces many of those challenges. We're delighted today to have two key panelists who will share their expertise with us. The first is Veronica Koman. She is a human rights lawyer and activist from Indonesia and has a key focus on West Papua. Many of her clients include West Papuans charged with treason for peacefully demanding their right to self-determination. She herself, because of her work, is now facing charges from Indonesian police because of her advocacy, and that has forced her to live in exile. In 2019, she was awarded the Sir Ronald Wilson Human Rights Award. Our second panelist for today is Ronny Kareni, a West Papuan musician and activist. And we're delighted to have him, and he has worked as a youth worker in Australia for the past 10 years. He is someone who graduated in diplomacy studies at the ANU in Canberra, and is Cultural Diplomacy Director of The Rise of the Morning Star, a musical and cultural movement. So we're very delighted to have him, and we know he's also been consults for the Pacific Mission of the United Liberation Movement for West Papua. So we're going to start with Ronny, and in a moment I'll invite, with Veronica, if I can. In a moment I'll invite her to speak. In particular, Veronica, I wondered if you could start off by telling us a bit of the background to special autonomy in West Papua, why you think it has failed, and what aspirations and needs in particular it has failed to meet. In addition, if you can highlight for us some of the human rights challenges, as well as what you think Australia's role or response should be to this. So Veronica, I'll hand it over to you now. Thanks.
Veronica, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I was on mute. Okay, so my presentation will be delivered in 3 parts. The first one is regarding special autonomy. Second part about human rights situation in West Papua, and lastly about why this matters to Australia. The first part about the special autonomy. So before there was special autonomy law signed in 2001, the Indonesian state has been saying that the right to self-determination of West Papuan people had been fulfilled by participating in the general election. So since this special autonomy law taken into force, in the Indonesian state has been saying that this is West Papuan people's right to self-determination. And so this justification is falls short because the special autonomy has failed, which because so this special autonomy law has been reduced to just about money and to just about how the both two governors and the regions across West Papua are indigenous West Papuans. But actually, this law is much more than that. It's supposed to be like there are so many important aspects that are being overlooked. For example, the law mandates, by law I mean the special autonomy law, the law mandates that there should be a reassessment of the history of integration, because that's the root cause of the conflict. For West Papuan people, it's annexation, it's occupation. But for Jakarta, it is already a fair referendum, a plebiscite back then. It's properly integrated. So, but Jakarta has done nothing about this, and as a consequence, West Papuan people have to suffer because they take to the streets like demanding this, protesting about the integration history. And also another example is about this local residency law in West Papua, but it is not being respected by Jakarta, that the migrants keep coming, that West Papuan people are minority in their own lands right now and marginalized in all aspects, be it economy or social culture. And another aspect is like local political parties. So the law actually will recognize that West Papua shall have their own local political party, just like in Aceh. But why is this not happening in West Papua? Is it because of racism? Why is it it can be implemented in Aceh but not in West Papua? Is it because the Acehnese are Malays, because they are Muslims? Why is being given treatment while actually both provinces should get a special autonomy? And And largely, special autonomy law has failed because all the bureaucracy has to go back to Jakarta again, and there's no political willingness by Jakarta to let West Papuans implement what's being already regulated under that law. And another aspect to see why this is failed is that the Human Development Index in West Papua is the lowest in the country, in Indonesia. Not just that, but the HDI index in Nduga Regency in West Papua is lower than the HDI of the country with the lowest HDI in the world, which is Niger. This is based on 2018 data registered in UNDP, recognized in UNDP. Make sense. It's practically the lowest in the world. It's worse than the country with the worst HDI index in the world. And so lastly, my recommendation about this is to let West Papuan themselves make evaluation of whether the special autonomy has worked for them or not. It is for them to decide. But I can already see the biggest obstacle will come from Jakarta. Jakarta will distrust of like, why are these West Papuans holding congress? So that's how it is. And now I'll go to my second part about the human rights situation in West Papua. So the current situation cannot be is basically integral to what happened last year, the West Papua uprising, where from 19th of August to 23rd of September last year, tens of thousands of West Papuans took to the street against racism and for self-determination referendum. So their tagline back then was, give us self-determination referendum as a solution to end this racism. And the aftermath is that more than 100 arrests and at least 61 people killed, and displacement. So currently there are political prisoners, 62 political prisoners, because 5 was just released yesterday. There are currently 62 political prisoners detained on treason charges just for their peaceful expression. And again, I would like to highlight that these people have to suffer because of the incompetence and the unwillingness of Jakarta to resolve the root cause of the conflict. And about displacement, there are currently at least 50,000 people displaced across West Papua in 5 regencies. And I think that the Indonesian government security approach to West Papua is ruthless, because even in COVID times, when the Liberation Army, the West Papua National Liberation Army, already offered a humanitarian pause due to COVID, but instead of not just ignoring, Jakarta did not just ignore this offer, but they deployed new military operation in my birth regency. And just a few weeks ago, Indonesian Minister of Foreign Affairs urged the UN Security Council for global ceasefire. So it's a mind-blowing hypocrisy, I think. And about currently the situation around COVID measures. So I see that there's a discriminatory and harsh treatment of in enforcing physical distancing measures in West Papua. That the first death due to these measures in Indonesia is, of course, Papuans. So one indigenous West Papuan had died because in front of a restaurant due to thrown knocked off by water cannon, and 2 indigenous Papuans in Tanjaya have been missing since last month. They were taken away by the Indonesian military, like based on COVID-19 relation, like inspection. And violence are reported across West Papua. In particularly striking is in Timika, where the local chief army in Timika already apologized because of this viral video of how a soldier used violence in enforcing the physical distancing. And now to my third part about the relationship, why this matters to Australia. So Australia has been not doing too great in raising about human rights issues in West Papua, largely many experts think due to Lombok Treaty. So this Lombok Treaty is a bilateral treaty about security cooperation signed in 2006. It also regulates about the cooperation about anti-terrorism and and in that treaty, it's a it was signed because as the aftermath of the Timor-Leste, the experience in Timor-Leste, that in that treaty it states that both countries shall respect the territorial integrity, national unity of each other's party. But my submission is that and also not to meddle in each other's internal affairs. But my submission is that the issue of West Papua is no longer of internal affairs. Like if we see the international law principle of exhaustion of local remedies, no effective domestic remedies is required. Let me rephrase. Sorry. The exhaustion of domestic remedies are not required if there is no effective remedies, and that is what's happening in West Papua. Like Amnesty International has described West Papua as a black hole of human rights, and it's like total impunity, that there is no single past or present human rights abuses cases are being addressed. So West Papua human rights issues are of international concern, and in particularly Article 2, paragraph 6 of the Lombok Treaty, it says, nothing in this agreement shall affect in any way the existing rights and obligations under international law. So, but in any case, human rights shall prevail over any bilateral treaty. This treaty is being deposited to the UN, right? And it means that all obligations under this treaty must be in compliance with what being enshrined in all UN Charter. And I think that is why Australia should not be reluctant to be speaking about human rights issues in West Papua. And as both states are sitting members of UN Human Rights Council, particularly, at the minimum, Australia should push for UN visit that has been promised by President Jokowi himself 3 years ago. That President Jokowi said that we welcome UN Human Rights Office to visit West Papua, but it hasn't happened until now. What is the Indonesian state hiding in West Papua? And also, I think it is also appropriate for Australia to push for press freedom in West Papua, to let the international journalists have an organization to have access in West Papua. In a normal world, these tens of thousands of displaced people in West Papua would have been assisted by the UNHCR and IOM, but it's a no-go zone for these international organizations. So that's how I think, at the minimum, the Australian government should raise to Indonesia. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Veronica. You gave us a really concise introduction to what is a really complex set of issues. You've mentioned both the challenges of and the continuing need to redress the past and address historical grievances. You've mentioned the ongoing distrust and in particular, I guess, the flare-up again of conflict in 2019 that was in many ways instigated as a result of racism. You've mentioned both the very dire situation for people, both in socioeconomic terms as well as large-scale displacement of people in West Papua. And I think your final comments there around the Lombok Treaty are quite pertinent in the tension, I guess, that there is there, both in terms of the recognition of sovereignty, but at the same time the need to ensure international law is upheld and human rights principles there. So thank you. I'm going to now turn to Ronny. And Ronny, I wondered if you could tell us, I mean, what's your view on this? Do you think that special autonomy in West Papua has failed? And are there other factors that you would add to what Veronica has mentioned, or are there further things you'd like to expand on as to what you think is the current issues at the moment? And I guess in particular, it would be great if you could comment on perhaps the way in which the COVID-19 situation adds further complexities and urgency to particularly issues around public health and community safety. Thanks.
Thank you, Melissa. Also, thank you, Veronica, for the amazing insight into the unfolding situation in West Papua. And thank you as well to the Diplomacy Training Program team. You guys doing an amazing job behind the scenes to make this webinar possible. Also, just want to welcome all of you viewers out here joining in around Australia and as well as in the wider region in this virtual space. Before I begin in responding to the question, in the spirit of reconciliation this week in Australia, I would also like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples, whose sovereignty has never been ceded. And I acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the custodians of the land that I'm residing here in Canberra. I pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Just like many Indigenous people around the world, the Indigenous people of West Papua have relentlessly fight for recognition for our sovereignty, our human dignity, our customary law, LORA, and the Tanah Adat, the traditionally owned land. To begin with, ladies and gentlemen, the presentation on the question of has special autonomy in West Papua failed, I will take on the view that special autonomy is held hostage for almost 20 years. I will unpack this view firstly by reflecting on the political and legal sabotage of West Papua's self-determination as a non-self-governing territory. Until now, West Papua remains a colony, not an integral part of Indonesia. The discussion tracks the legal maneuvers carved out to deny West Papuans right to participation, and special autonomy being used as a mechanism of mass destruction in utilizing military means to enforce any development programs, including special autonomy under Megawati Sukarno Putri, Special Unit of Acceleration of Development under Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, and now the development and infrastructural approach under Jokowi, more than to adopt a conciliatory approach. I will also critically discuss three key elements to reaffirm the special autonomy being held hostage from the initial draft law, which involved Papuan community and the society in the process of formulating the concept, and also draw on white matter for the international community to remain proactive and vigilant within the next 12 months to generate these discussions like this, debate, to make inquiry into Jokowi's government on what holistic approach that they are discussing now, which the current 2001 law is ending on November 2021, and I will conclude with some response. So to my next slide, I will reflect on the political and legal sabotage by Indonesia in the self-determination of our non-self-governing territory. I must say that West Papua is a nation state in waiting. The name West Papua is founded in the manifesto of the New Guinea RAD, our first national parliament, officiated on 5th of April 1961. The parliament succeeded in birthing the people's aspiration for an independent sovereign nation when it implemented the resolution, firstly to call the new nation Papua Barat or West Papua. Secondly, to raise the Morning Star flag alongside the Netherlands flag. Thirdly, to have Haitanaku Papua as the national anthem. And finally, the Victoria crowned pigeon as the state symbol. Now, this is very important to note because I'll be touching in the second point about three elements, key elements that why special autonomy is held hostage. For West Papua, we meet the basic definition of sovereignty founded in the 1933 Montevideo Convention with a defined territory, permanent population, government, and the capacity to enter in relations with other states. The only puzzle remaining is fear amongst many states within the international community to recognize West Papua sovereignty under the international law. In other words, there has never been an act of self-determination in West Papua. Almost 6 decades on, Papua nationalism continues to thrive. Our 19 days of freedom was short-lived between 1st of December to 19th December 1961. And Indonesia violated our non-self-governing territory with a performative declaration of war to annihilate the Dutch defense and occupy West Papua. The use of force in breach of the UN Charter, particularly Article 73, by law, West Papua is a sacred trust of Dutch as an administering power. The Dutch diligently carried out its obligation under Article 73 until West Papua attains a full measure of self-government. In other words, until an act of self-determination. But after Indonesia's failure of 4 attempts in the UN General Assembly for recognition of its sovereignty claim over West Papua, the fabrication of a UN peace treaty in August 1962 effectively gifted Indonesia with 459,412 square kilometers of Melanesian land. Basically, the 1962 New York Agreement was a land grabbing by Indonesia and America, rendered as a peace treaty between Indonesia and the Netherlands that was right in the midst of a global war between the US and the USSR. It was constructed in part of unlawful actions by the UN Secretary General U Thant that put the UN in contempt of the authority, justice, and dignity of international law, and condemned West Papuans to Indonesia. Even the 1969 Musyawarah, better known as an act of deliberation more than a plebiscite, this act was an involuntary response by 0.12% of the population to a script written by Indonesian government. The same method scripted in the Special Autonomy Law number 21, 2001. And this brought into my next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, there are several main aspects within the legal framework of Special Autonomy number 1 that was watered down from the initial draft law, which involved West Papuans in the process of formulating the concept. Father von den Broek make observation that the offer of autonomy to West Papua was made based on the assumption in the governmental circles which identify the problems in West Papua were mainly problems that are originating from the failure of development policy. What becomes clear is that in the document, the basic assumption is far from responding two basic aspirations of the Papuan people. So I will explain these three key elements or highlight these three key elements to make sure why or reaffirm why special autonomy is held hostage. So first, I'll take a look at and I will quote, respect for local socio-cultural expression, including the freedom to fly the Papuan flag and sing the community's national anthem, unquote, found in the Chapter 2 and Chapter 11 of the law. The initial draft law stresses that Papuan culture is rooted in Melanesian culture and therefore differs from most of the cultural identities in Indonesia. However, in the introductory consideration part of the special autonomy law, it is underlined that Papuan people are part of the indigenous peoples in Indonesia, while it is admitted that there is a difference of culture, language, tradition, and history. In Chapter 2 of the special autonomy law, the attention is given to local symbols, which is an own flag, an own anthem, and a logo, which is the crown pigeon, instead of Garuda bird. Whereas the draft law qualifies these elements as expressions of identity of the Papuan people. The special autonomy law values them as cultural symbols and explicitly refuses them as the status of symbols of sovereignty. Secondly, the second element, and I quote, an effective say in political decision of major concern, unquote. The special autonomy law exempts more fields from the jurisdiction of provincial authorities than the draft law does. Where the draft law provides for a participating role by the provincial parliament and government in decision about deployment of security forces, the special autonomy law only deals with police forces and limits the role of provincial decision-making bodies. It's found in the Chapter 13, Article 48 of the special autonomy law. Even with population policies, the draft law demanded that transmigration programs be stopped completely. But in the special autonomy law, however, transmigration is still agreed on. And that's found in Chapter 18, Article 61. And the third element, key element to the special autonomy that I want to point out here, and I quote, attention to the demand that justice be done and human rights violations be halted, unquote. The special autonomy law recognizes that traditional rights, such as those related to land and the use of the land, has to be based on mutual agreement, according to Chapter 11, Article 43. It stipulates as well that Tanah Adat, or traditionally owned land, which has already been handed over to other parties, should not be disputed anymore. Herewith, it counters the more radical tune of the draft law, which claims recognition of almost absolute traditional rights on land and water with all its riches. With these three elements as examples within the content of the law on special autonomy and the draft law by West Papuans, we can see the divergence in political and legal framework from the central government and the Papuan government, Papuan people's perspective. For the central government, is that there were many mistakes made during the New Order era, but a reform government, even under Jokowi, cannot be held responsible for the activities of his predecessors, and yet hold a basic assumption that the advantage of special autonomy for West Papuan remain valid. On the other hand, the West Papuan community view Jakarta as out of touch of what their basic aspirations since Indonesia occupied West Papua. This breeds distrust and has proved that special autonomy law did not work as expected. Even when President Megawati Soekarno-Putri began rolling out the special autonomy policy, Tay Seluai, president of the Papuan Presidium Council, was murdered during the same year. A decade after the approval of the special autonomy law, when Papuans declared that Otsus gagal or special autonomy failed, we found Agus Alua, who was the former chair of the Majelis Rakyat Papua or Papuans People Assembly, a cultural representation of the indigenous Papuan people established under the special autonomy framework, died in April 2011. After receiving a phone call from Jakarta and moments before the new MRP membership was to be sworn in, human rights activists said Alua was ousted from the MRP because of his strong stance against the central government's policies on Papua. So, ladies and gentlemen, on my next third point, which I want to point out here that nothing happened in West Papua is coincidental. Everything is politically calculated. And in mid-March of this year, several ministries, including the Home Affairs Ministry, discussed the Special Autonomy Fund and planned to open up more provinces in the region. Speaking to Jakarta Globe on 12th March, Indonesia's Chief Security Minister Mahfud MD said the government would continue to provide a Special Autonomy Fund for Papua between now until end of November 2021. The government has started the process to create new law. Mahfud described this, and I quote, to give it a legal basis, unquote. So why is it matter for state and non-state actors, particularly Australia and Indonesia, strategic partners, to be proactive and within the next 12 months to continue the discussion, the debate, to make inquiry? And as Veronica has pointed out in terms of Lombok Treaty, we cannot use Lombok Treaty as the scapegoat for Australia's complacency to Indonesia's culture of impunity. The special autonomy is not the middle way of satisfying Papua's grievances. And Australia cannot maintain Jakarta's claim based on uti possidetis, which is a legal principle in international law that associated with territorial integrity. The complacency from Australia can be traced back when it took part in voting in the 1969 agreement, even though Attorney General Sir Garfield Barwick believed Indonesia's claim of sovereignty should have been lodged with the International Court of Justice, which is stressed, and I quote, "The long-term interest of stability and progress will be served by a bona fide performance of the agreement's self-determination provisions," unquote. And this statement was made at the UN General Assembly plenary on 21st of September 1962. So in conclusion, special autonomy has been held hostage for 20 years. And as discussed, the root cause of the problem is Indonesia's colonization of the West Papuans' homeland, for which the United Nations is historically responsible. It is within the General Assembly or the UN's principal judicial organ, the International Court of Justice, that there are mechanisms for resolutions of historical facts and the development of a solution in the reform of recognition or an act of self-determination, as in the recent cases of the Bougainville and New Caledonia. For West Papua as well to be registered in this process on the UN decolonization, it requires 2/3 of General Assembly, which 127 out of 193 member states, to vote in support of the motion that is raised by the Vanuatu government, which is West Papua's sponsor. And also in preparation for this, the late 2019 Pacific Island Forum, an 18-member intergovernmental forum that includes Australia and New Zealand and the African Caribbean Pacific group of 79 member states, have each passed motions that call on all parties to address the root cause of the ongoing conflict, and on Indonesia to allow the outstanding UN Human Rights Commission's fact-finding mission to West Papua. And for this to succeed, the motion requires Indonesia's allies to Australia, like Australia and New Zealand, to review their support for the legal fiction that West Papua is a separatist conflict rather than a colony with a right to self-determination. Such nations need to review their support for Special Autonomy 2001, which all major West Papuan institutions determined in 2010 have failed. Because of the issue is not a domestic problem that can be resolved with President Jokowi's development programs. Rather, it is an international legal issue that requires UN intervention. And this has also drawing on that what is really happening now during the COVID period. There has already been at least three cases or more than 3 cases of extrajudicial killing during the COVID period, and as well as the facilities, health facilities that is now in West Papua are not adequate enough to really support, let alone the medical supplies to really support, and even there's no traction of the spread of the COVID-19, which is the community transmission of this disease within West Papua. And indigenous Papuans have taken the matter into their own hands, where investigative reports by Fabrianus, who did a very good article about how Papuans blocked roads to stop the transmission of this COVID-19. And this is something that we're seeing, that Jakarta is not taking the issue in West Papua very seriously, let alone the COVID-19, let alone the human rights situation and the ongoing culture of impunity, as well as those who are now behind bars across West Papua and the 7 political prisoners still in Balikpapan. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ronny. That was a very passionate, informative presentation, and thank you so much. It was really clear, both your analysis and assessment of the special autonomy law and how, I guess, initial debates in the drafting were different from the end result of that law, and then I guess the implications of it and what that looks like on the ground. What I would like to do now is we have some questions. I'd encourage others, if there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat room. I'd like to go to Veronica now. So we have a first question. I'll break it into 2 parts for you. So I think the first is around the differences between Papua and Aceh in terms of the special autonomy law. So I wonder, Veronica, if you could tell us a bit about what are the differences between those 2? And then the second part of their question was, in the chat function, some people have asked about the Constitutional Court and its role in, I guess, reviewing the special autonomy law in West Papua, but I think particularly in relation to political parties. So there were some questions about, is there a current Constitutional Court case, or what has the Constitutional Court in Indonesia been doing on this issue in relation to West Papua? So I'll have that question for you, and then Ronny, perhaps after that, I wondered if you could comment a bit more about this possibility of a new law being drafted. And I guess my question to you is, well, is this an opportunity? Is this actually a genuine chance to perhaps rethink the situation and contribute to the drafting of a new law, or is it perhaps being conducted for other reasons? And are you worried that there might not be enough scope for it to be something that genuinely reflects the concerns of people in West Papua? So Veronica, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you for the questions. Regarding the first question, the differences between special autonomy in Aceh and Papua, I have to admit that I'm not an expert on Aceh, including the autonomy law, so I cannot, unfortunately, I cannot answer that. But what's striking are at least 2 issues that in Aceh, we see that Aceh has been successful in implementing their local regulations, that the Sharia law, that it is actually in contrary to the national law, particularly the human rights law. But Jakarta even respects Aceh, because the discourse is that like, oh, we cannot touch their Acehese local law because that might disturb their special autonomy. That's what we are seeing in Aceh right now, like people being flocked in public, and yeah, that's being respected. And another striking part is the local political party, because in Aceh they are allowed to do so, but it's not working in West Papua. Jakarta will not let West Papua has their own political party. Other than that, I cannot comment, and unfortunately. And the second question about the judicial review to the Constitutional Court, I will go back to my recommendation in my presentation, that it is up to West Papuan people, that other people cannot decide, not even Jakarta. So it must be coming from West Papuan people. They should have like a third Congress of West Papuan people to really discuss and evaluate whether the spatial autonomy has worked for them or not, and whether Constitutional Court should be a one of the avenues that they want to challenge, address. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
And adding on to that as well, echoing the same method or the model that Jakarta students engage in, is to have the collective participation, which in the initial stages of the 2001 law came into effect on 1st January 2002. There was a massive participation of people. And that's the outcome with the draft law, and a lot of it has been watered down. So if this new law that is going to take effect after 2021, it definitely provides an opportunity for strategic and dialogue partners of Indonesia, as well as state actors within the region, Australia and New Zealand, to play that proactive role, and to be able as well to use their trade relationship, their bilateral relationship, to engage in a more constructive and meaningful discussion, to reflect that the special autonomy law, which I've argued and hold the view that it has been held hostage for 20 years, needs a proper holistic approach and a view which reflect the political and legal framework that has all the voices, all the perspectives discussed there. And definitely if it is the constitutional law that provides that avenue, so be it. And so it provides that scope as well for those discussions. And also, if within the two, within West Papua and Jakarta, if the lack of trust is not providing or prevailing in those spaces, then a third-party mediation process is also needed to address the root causes. And this is very significant. Steps that Jakarta needs to look in a holistic view. And if within the region, through their engagement within the Melanesian Spearhead Group or within the Pacific Island Forum framework, then this discussion needs to be really addressed within the region as well, to discuss what's the plan, how it's going to be look like for the people of West Papua and for Jakarta for this new law, which is at the moment there's discussion already underway.
Great, thank you, Ronny. And you know, that does sound like an opportunity, but as you say, there is a challenge there of making sure there is genuine consultation, genuine participation and contribution to the making of that law. And I think perhaps today has been a useful opportunity. I guess we've gone very quickly through both the history and the present challenges. But in many ways, I think it suggests that for this new, the drafting of this new law to be useful, there is a need to learn the lessons from the past few decades and the problems that have arisen that haven't been solved, that need to very much. Now, I think we have perhaps one last question that's come in, and then we might finish. So let me just read this out. So when talking about why Australia should be concerned with the issue of West Papua's self-determination, the points about international law and human rights have been raised. Can you suggest any other reasons why Australia specifically, as opposed to the international community generally, should intervene? So perhaps we'll first go to Veronica and Ronny, and if you would like to make any final statements as well, please feel free to do that, and then we'll finish up. Thanks.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah, definitely. Like I said, that West Papua is of international concern because there's no effective remedies inside Indonesia. It's total impunity. Australia is not just part of international community, but it is the closest neighbor, well, except PNG, but the closest neighbor in the Pacific. It's just right in the doorstep of Australia. But how is this massive human rights violation happening in Australia's doorstep while Australia is a leader in the Pacific? I think it says something about, the leadership. I think it will be great if Australia do more about human rights in West Papua. And regarding the right to self-determination. Right to self-determination is not just about political status. It is about how the people, the indigenous people, can decide how they want to be developed. Like the infrastructure approach by Jakarta has all been Jakarta-centered, while not actually consulting with the people. And another example of how the West Papuan people be able to determine their social and economic and cultural aspects of their lives, it's all being denied in West Papua. As a human rights lawyer, I cannot think of any single human right that is not violated in West Papua. So that's how I think Australia should be doing more. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of Australia's role with Indonesia, at the moment, Australia is training and funding and aiding the Indonesian security forces, which pretty much the anti-terrorism unit, the Detachment 88, as well as other units, the special allied units that have used this training to go in and combat peaceful activists on the ground. So with the case of Makota Buni in 2012, which has demonstrated or reported in Australian 7:30 ABC media about that engagement, which those trainings are used to kill West Papuans. That's one thing that Australia government and the people need to really ask about their tax. Where is it going? Is it helping to fund, to kill innocent lives? And also, the Australian government putting out submissions for any inquiry of their relationship within the region, and it is an important time as well that people can write and make submissions to Australian government, especially the defense ties that Australia has with Indonesia, especially looking into the Lombok Treaty, Clause 2.3, by which Indonesia, it's an open-ended, one could kind of like interpret it in a different way. For Indonesia, it's that territorial integrity that no other country can fall into, whereas here, it's not relevant. And so to review that Lombok Treaty and add human rights situation into this defense treaty, which every now and again they will review and revisit those this treaty. So it's also important to look into that and call on Australian government to add within those clauses addressing the human rights, but also the right to self-determination of the people of West Papua, which I quoted Sir Garfield making that statement in 1962, and it's still, that position still stands today, that West Papua requires an advisory opinion of Indonesia's occupation into West Papua. So requires that historical facts to be looked further into. So those are just a couple of things, and for people to have a think how we could also communicate with us. There'll be some of those links that are out there. There are various people that have already been dedicated over the years that have studied this complex issue, whether it's on environmental lands, whether it's between Australia and Indonesia military ties, or whether it's purely the legal recourse that really needs to be looked and debated in that. Yeah, drop us a line. There'll be our contact details there to continue this conversation. But yes, thank you very much once again to be able to discuss this with everyone as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronny. And I did want to say in the last comment that we have in the chat screen, someone pointed out, of course, that as Veronica mentioned earlier, given that journalism is restricted in West Papua, I think it's even more important that we have seminars like this and hear from people like you, Ronny, who can really tell us about what is going on and what the key issues are at the moment and why Australia should be concerned. So look, I'd like to end our seminar. We have the DTP organisers will just say some final words, and I believe they do have the contact details of our speakers. So there were some requests for information. Where can you learn and read more? And I think you're welcome to contact our panelists if you're interested in further information. But I'll hand it now over to DTP.
Fantastic. Thank you, Melissa. And I would also like to extend a massive thank you to both Veronica and Ronny for joining us today on behalf of the Diplomacy Training Program. We're really grateful that you guys have taken the time to share your insights on such a pertinent issue. So on this slide, there are a few links and resources that you can use to find out a bit more about human rights in both Indonesia and West Papua. I know that this slide will pass too quickly for you to write this all down. There's some more resources on the next slide as well. But what our plan is if you've registered for the event on the new DTP website and you gave us your email address, we'll send this list of resources to you so you can do some further investigating. And then if you haven't registered using that link, you can find that registration link on the Facebook page for this event. So if you click and register, even though it's after the event has already passed, we'll make sure that we send through this information so that you can do a bit more research afterwards. And then, as Ronny said, and Melissa touched on as well, here is everyone's contact details. So we'll pass these on to everybody that registered for the event too. And if you're interested in contacting DTP directly, we'll send through DTP's email address. Or if you wanted to do some more research about DTP as an organisation, we've popped the website link there as well. And finally, just to wrap up, thank you so much for everyone that tuned in. We're really grateful for your participation and your interest in this issue. Especially given it's so close to Australia's heart and to Australia's borders. We hope that you got a lot out of joining today, and we hope to keep in contact somehow in the future. Thank you.